Since the reintroduction of protective combat helmets during World War I, quite a lot has changed. Be it shape, size, color, or composition, they have continued to improve and evolve to meet the ever-changing battlefield. One thing that has stayed somewhat constant, though, is the practice of camouflaging said helmets. Whether they're mass-produced and issued or handmade by troops, helmet covers continue to be a vital element of many uniforms. However, one that seems to stand out from the rest, that is when it's not concealing the wearer's head, is that of Israel's Mitznefet. When World War I broke out, just about every army marched in wearing minimally protective headgear made out of either cloth or leather. Seeing head injuries and casualties on a massive scale due to shrapnel and debris, most nations were quick to develop newer, more protective headpieces in the form of steel helmets. As these new pieces found their way into the trenches and battlefields, many troops began to devise ways to improve upon their concealment capabilities. Through things like painting patterns, to attaching foliage and netting, to fabricating cloth and fabric wraps, the idea of helmet covers was essentially born. When World War II broke out, this idea continued along with the introduction of issued pieces, from netting to fully fledged camouflage covers. As the years went on, the concept of helmet covers and accessories became more and more commonplace among many world militaries, along with the practice of modifying or creating ones from scratch using whatever was on hand. Israel was no exception. When the Israeli Defense Force, IDF for short, was using M1 clones and early Kevlar helmets such as the OR-201, covers were devised, often made of solid colored mesh netting that would often be held down against the helmet by way of an elastic band. It wasn't until 1994 or so did these very odd-looking covers, known as Mitznefets, began being used. Composed of a large piece, or in some instances pieces, of often camouflaged mesh netting and form of elastic band, they are fashioned into a larger, baggy, or floppy type cover. Because of their overall look, they are often compared and referred to as either chef hats, shower caps, or clown hats. The actual name of Mitznefet, though, has a bit of a history and significance, but also boils down to its overall appearance. Though the word Mitznefet can be translated a few different ways, such as wrap, bonnet, headdress, mitre, or turban, the piece itself is named after a much older headpiece worn by the high priest of Israel, considered the chief religious officer of Judaism between roughly 610 BC and AD 70, while serving in the tabernacle and Herod's temple, also known as the Second Temple of Jerusalem. This head covering, also known as the priestly turban or mitre, was said to be, and sometimes depicted as, larger and more bulbous in shape with a flat top that was secured by two sets of blue-colored cords. So, when you take the IDF's Mitznefet and put it up against the ancient Mitznefet, you'll see why they share the same name. Okay, so with the namesake out of the way, let's actually take a look at these and break them down a bit. To start, it should be said that the exact origin of them isn't precisely known, with numerous rumors and stories suggesting things from something as simple as a recruit during his first few weeks of training creating one, which was then eventually spread because of his unit's officers, to others such as them being developed by occupation forces stationed within the more vegetated areas of the security zone in southern Lebanon. Whatever the case may be, they took off in the mid-1990s and have since then been seen in numerous iterations due to most being custom-made by infantry units. Much like personal helmet covers of the past, as well as ghillie suits, soldiers were essentially given the task of creating their own. This led to a wide variety of versions made up of different colored netting, sizes, and shapes, as well as forms of securing them to the helmet such as stretchable bands and cords, with some soldiers even repurposing the elastic from extra or used underwear. This inevitably led to other colors as well as camouflage designs, be they dyed or from repurposed netting and suits, becoming more and more prevalent. Here are a few examples of the more popular styles seen. You have solid colors such as brown, tan, or green, along with custom dyed patterns which were seen on these, 6-color desert, also known as chocolate chip, and 3 major reversible woodland arid patterns, one being a more large-scale design, one being a much smaller one, and the third appearing almost as a 3-dimensional design utilizing patterns not only printed onto the mesh, but also over it. Most of the types just mentioned appear to have been cut from much larger pieces such as netting to conceal things like equipment and vehicles, as well as 2-piece mesh oversuits frequently used by reconnaissance and sniper-based units. Now, these aren't the only colors and designs, as others have been popping up as of late, such as Multicam, ATAX, and Tiger Stripe, though they seem more targeted for commercial or aftermarket use, as they are made en masse by companies such as Samson Gear and Agalite. The interesting thing about these covers is that they can be considered the most prevalent and used camouflage piece in all of the Israeli Defense Force due to the fact that there is no standard issue camouflage uniform. Though US surplus pieces such as woodland and 3-color desert BDUs and helmet covers are frequently seen, they are often issued in small numbers and used mostly for training purposes. The IDF had, in 2018 and 19, trialed a few experimental designs, but ultimately dropped the idea due to the concern that Israeli forces could be mistaken as enemies. That, though, is a whole other story that will be discussed in a future video. But speaking of camouflage, by now you're possibly wondering why such a weird baggy shape. Well, this design actually benefits the wearers in quite a number of ways. The first and most important is its concealment capabilities. The large, baggy, and easily adjustable design actually helps break up the head and helmet of the wearer in that it completely eliminates the standard look, replacing it with a flatter or more uneven one. Where most other helmet covers retain the overall dome shape of the helmet, this one completely changes it into untold numbers of shapes due to its loose and large size. People have said they can even give the appearance of rocks and foliage depending on the distance. It's quite natural for people to recognize the shape of a human head. Additionally, soldiers and fighters alike can also easily recognize a combat helmet in that almost all of them used nowadays share more or less the same design, incorporating a dome top that rests upon a head. When you add in something as strange looking as the Mitznefet, which can drastically alter and even entirely eliminate that look, enemies have a much harder time trying to locate and identify Israeli soldiers out in the field. Not only that, but it also offers a great deal of protection against the elements such as the sun and heat, as it doubles as essentially a large boonie-style hat. Due to it being composed of a mesh material, it allows for airflow, thus keeping the wearer cool, while also being easily adjusted to different angles depending on the user's location in relation to the sun for maximum coverage. On top of that, it can be worn on its own, which grants the same concealment protection capabilities, as well as a small personal insect guard if they decide to pull it down over the face. Finally, it seems that it can also allow for soldiers to easily hide headphones or earbuds to listen to music while out on training and maneuvers. Due to their overall size and shape, however, they do have the drawback of them being easily tangled among branches and other outcroppings, but because they simply sit on top of rather than being tucked into or fastened to the suspension or interior of the helmet, they can quickly be taken off and put back on at a moment's notice. Now, all of this seems pretty good, right? A multi-purpose helmet cover that sounds like it can do everything. Well, it does boast quite a list of positives. However, it is not the sole cover within the IDF, as quite a few others are used, with some more traditional and recognizable ones even being worn on the helmet underneath them. Finally, within the same vein, we must ask, if this cover is so effective in regards to so many different things, why isn't it being used around the world? Well, technically it has been seen being used by other countries such as Poland by way of certain units such as the 11th Armored Cavalry Division, as well as Ukraine, at least according to the Russian media source Sputnik, which mentioned how 20 covers had been sent by Israel in 2015. However, the biggest use of these outside of Israel is actually much closer than you think: Palestine. More specifically by Hamas. Often seen being worn during ceremonies such as parades, anniversaries, and funerals, but also during operations, many members of the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam, the armed branch of Hamas, have been seen wearing covers that bear a striking resemblance to the Mitznefet. But it should be noted that these pieces differ slightly from the IDF versions in a number of ways, which are being made not only of similar mesh material but also thicker, more solid cloth in a wide variety of colors and camouflage patterns, their overall look appearing to almost always directly match the uniforms of their wearers, and finally that they are often worn over balaclavas and other face coverings along with a headband rather than over helmets. Much like the IDF, these are used to break up the easily recognizable shape of a wearer's head, though there has been some speculation certain versions, specifically the solid green and lighter brown ones, are worn along with uniforms designed to imitate IDF forces to allow for a few moments of confusion. Finally, with commercial ones becoming more and more available, pieces are making their way around the world, and it may only be a matter of time until these start popping up in larger, more official capacities. But aside from these sporadic uses, why haven't other countries adopted them? Well, it likely boils down to two reasons. The first can sort of be explained by the phrase, "necessity is the mother of invention," in that since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, they have often found themselves combating enemies of various scales both domestically and abroad numerous times. This in turn has caused the IDF to form a unique way in which they operate, leading to a number of innovations, tactics, and procedures that many outside of the country can interpret as peculiar and even unorthodox. Some examples are solid color uniforms still being worn, the corner shot, a firearm accessory that allows for the firing of certain small arms around corners, and many off-duty soldiers carrying around their primary firearm. So something as unique as a helmet cover that, to many, resembles a shower cap becoming commonplace due to its effectiveness regardless of its overall look is not unheard of. The second is that other nations simply are doing what they've been doing for years when it comes to helmet covers and headgear. Many countries have different approaches to concealment and protection against the sun, be it standard helmet covers, of which numerous allow for the modification or the addition of foliage and other material to break up the shape, custom pieces such as ghillie suits or headpieces like the cabbage patch and boonie hats, or head wraps like the keffiyeh, which allow various levels of protection from the heat and sun. That being said, we've once again come to the end of another video. Hopefully this one helped provide a level of information on these rather unique and definitely stranger looking helmet covers. If you enjoyed it, why not give a like and consider subscribing to the channel? If not, that's totally fine, just be sure to check back frequently for more of the history of videos right here on Uniform History.